Hello, this is astrologynewsreport.com with your hosts David Anton Savage and Ron Berger.
Now we go to our third segment of this week's report, People in the News, where we will analyze the Vedic astrology birth chart of a newsworthy person.
This week we analyze the birth chart of Pope Francis.
We did a segment on him when he first became Pope last spring, but now, in light of recent events, it feels like a good time to update things.
This is especially true since we did predict that this Pope was quite likely to upset the established order inside the church during his tenure, and his comments of this past week are causing quite a stir, with much hand-wringing indeed.
Yeah, the chart we are using is based on a rectified birth time, arrived at through an analysis of the facts of his life and his personal history. Some of the really interesting features of his chart are: he's Gemini rising. Gemini is always eager to embrace new ideas, new concepts, and innovations. Gemini also loves talk and debate for its own sake. Gemini sees things from multiple viewpoints and likes to test out others' opinions. And they say that Geminis speak with their hands, and certainly that's true of this pontiff, who's always got his hands in the air when he's talking.
Also see that Ketu is in his ascendant, since Ketu is the dissolver in Vedic astrology. Having it in the first house of self makes one self-effacing, quite appropriate for a man of the cloth. But then look at all those Sagittarius planets in his seventh house, including Mercury, the ruler of the chart overall. That brings in a whole other side of him. Sagittarius is the sign of independence, willfulness, and stubborn self-righteousness. Quite the opposite of Gemini, but Sagittarius is also warm and generous and wants to see that justice be done.
Yes. All right. Well, it looks like Pope Francis definitely has two sides of himself. The rising sign Gemini with Ketu gives the appearance of flexibility and self-denial, whereas the Sagittarius planets indicate a much more self-centered, egoic nature. Just like the Roman god Janus, he contains two selves within himself. I suppose if you are going to be the pontiff, you had better be skillful in both worlds.
And then there's the Moon-Venus combination in his eighth house. The eighth house is secret actions, metaphysics, long-term problems, humiliation. And he does have some past history in Argentina where he got stained by getting too cozy with the dictatorship at the time. But what's interesting is that the Moon and Venus are in Shravana, a lunar sign associated with upholding and preserving cultural traditions. And what about that Mars in his fourth house? That's a pretty powerful position.
Yes, David. When you have Mars in the fourth house, you have a huge inner force, a sense of inner power that other people can sense. Mars in Virgo makes him quite critical, a sharp, discriminating intellect.
And Mars in Virgo is known to be a jokester. I love that comment he made to the Cardinals after they elected him Pope. May God forgive you for what you have done.
Yeah, it's a priceless bit of self-deprecation. All right, let's look at the situation in his ninth house. I mean, that is the house of religion, after all. So here Pope Francis has Saturn in its own sign, Aquarius. Now, Saturn is the planet of the establishment, and that does fit in the sense of Catholicism being one of the conventional established religions. And you can't be too much of a renegade if you're going to become a pope. But Aquarius is the sign of the humanitarian, with a soft spot for the downtrodden. And Saturn is the planet of the working classes. So Pope Francis's ninth house of beliefs, they are rooted in the Aquarian desire to do something for those at the bottom.
Well, maybe with his Moon and Venus in the eighth house of secrets. He doesn't display all of his colors up front. And then there's Gemini rising. That sign is known for saying one thing while thinking something else. Gemini conceals its true thoughts.
Yeah, but then there's also Sagittarius, and Sagittarius speaks his mind. Sagittarius, in fact, can be quite blunt. Read his comments in that recent article on gays, abortion, and contraception. He's amazingly forthright. Okay, anyway, this chart has some obvious contradictions in it, so it would appear that Pope Francis is actually a rather complicated character.
Well, Ron, I'm no Catholic, even if I am from the Boston area. But I absolutely do agree with the Pope on this one when he says that focusing too much on divisive issues threatens to bring down the church like a house of cards. And I might like to add, just because the church is 2,000 years old, it don't mean it can't die.
Okay. So, what is it in his natal chart that impels him to want to drag the church into the 21st century? And why now? And where does this all end up?
Well, I guess at this point we'd, as usual, like to take a look at his major period and subperiod.
All right. So, right now, Pope Francis is in his Mercury major period and his Jupiter subperiod.
That has got to be a potent combo for him, since Mercury is the ruler of his first house and his fourth house, and Jupiter rules his seventh and 10th houses. All this has his Kendras in play at this time.
Quite true, David. But let's unpack that jargon there for our audience. The Kendra houses are the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th, and they are all considered action houses in Vedic astrology. To have all four of these houses lit up simultaneously by having their rulers turned on by the major and sub periods at this point in his life adds up to quite a bit of karmic power.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Hmm.
Both the major period ruler Mercury and the sub period ruler Jupiter are in the woeful sign Sagittarius, further proof that the Pope is full of dynamic energy and ready to work his will on the established order, the Mother Church.
Uh-oh. Let's take a look at the current transits. Jupiter is transiting in Gemini. That's his ascendant, which is activated now by the Mercury major period. The planet of enlargement and optimism going through your ascendant, that makes you really full of yourself. Jupiter is also sending its aspect to all of his Sagittarius natal planets, adding even more encouragement for self expression.
That's a really good point. Is there some danger of over optimism or false confidence?
Interesting question. In order for Jupiter to be grounded, it needs the influence of Saturn. But with Saturn hanging out there transiting his fifth house, there's not a whole lot holding him back.
Yes, and Mars is transiting in his second house. That's the
Ah,
planet of action, energy, and confrontation in his second house of speech.
hmm,
Certainly, that's a factor in making him speak out at this time.
yeah,
And just yesterday, he expanded on his targets to include money, saying that people should stop worshiping the god called money.
right. Hard to do in this culture. Right. That sounds like what a person with a Sagittarius Mercury would do, too. Telling other people what they should do.
Mm.
Anyway, well, when Mars transits into Leo, that comes next. That'll be his third house of efforts in October. Pope Francis will be energized to do more than just talk. And then, at the end of November, Mars will go into his fourth house. And there it contacts his natal Mars in a house activated already by his major period Lord Mercury. Watch out. The action will really begin to happen when that rolls around. So, David, what's your take on the Saturn Rahu combo as it affects the pontiff?
My take on the Saturn Rahu conjunction transiting in his fifth house of past life credit makes me believe that he is making a major withdrawal from this most special of banks in Vedic astrology. His credit looks good. Why not draw from the reserves? He has earned it.
Yeah. Interesting, too, that the fifth house is teachers and teachings. And after all, he's the head teacher in the Catholic Church, right? And he certainly seems to want to reach out to a larger community. Pontiff is definitely going for a big tent form of Catholicism.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And also, I really do find it noteworthy. Down the road, just a little bit, in January of 2017, Pope Francis goes into his K2 major period, which will really light up that natal K2 in his first house. It will take a man that already has a naturally strong bent towards transcendent spirituality and put even more focus on that.
Hmm.
And for Pope Francis, this first house K2 getting activated at the age of 80, that's pretty profound timing.
Indeed.
K2 is K2 is the supreme moksha in Vedic astrology. It's no accident that he has arrived on the world stage at this time to bring a message of universality in this age of crisis and division.
Wow. Okay, David. Sounds like you have him slated for sainthood already. And with that, we will end our analysis of Pope Francis of K2.